As I was finishing residency, my dad became ill, and I'm an only child. And so I was sort of forced to decide what I was going to do about either taking over the portfolio or continuing medicine. And I decided to do both for a little while. So I took over in 2011. And at that time, I was pretty lucky. I was very lucky, but we had an in-house attorney that worked for us full-time. And an analyst who had been working for us for like 3 years. And then we had a pretty well-seasoned property management company at that point.
Oh, wow. So you guys were a pretty big company.
They were pretty established, yeah. So when I stepped in, our current president of property management had been working for our company for already like 15 years. So we were really lucky that we had longevity there. But I ended up taking over and then working in a low-income clinic as an ophthalmologist for a period of time. And then eventually it was too much, so I stepped back.
Hey guys, welcome to episode 39 of the Realized Gains podcast. I'm Hayden Tran. I'm an Oregon and Washington realtor, and I am an investor in multifamily and single-family homes.
And I'm your co-host, Jordan Lee. I'm a mortgage lender based in Portland, licensed in 9 states, and I invest in single-family homes. And today we have a really great interview for you. We interviewed a physician turned real estate mogul, Ashley Hayden.
Yeah, eye surgeon, yeah. So we had a lot of fun with her, talking about her experience, basically going through the whole medical school residency, practice, and then basically immediately switching as she finished. And she's built quite the portfolio.
Yeah, huge portfolio in the thousands, a lot of experience buying, selling all over the multifamily and commercial world.
Yeah, and she gives us really great insights on, going the office retail direction versus going commercial residential, and the pitfalls and downfalls of that. Her, unique ways of basically, validating whether a property is good or not, and then her thoughts on the current market.
Yeah, so if you're interested in getting into the commercial and multifamily world, this is a great podcast for you.
Hey guys, welcome to the Realized Gains podcast. I'm Hayden Tran.
And I'm your co-host, Jordan Lee, and I'm super excited to introduce our guest for the day, Ashley Hayden.
Hi.
Yeah, Ashley, do you mind just giving us a quick introduction, like how you got where you are today, your story, what brought you to Portland, or I guess maybe you're from the area?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd love to hear it.
Sure. So I grew up here. I was born here. Actually, I'm an Oregonian native.
Rare breed.
Yeah, very uncommon.
All three of us, right?
Yeah. Salem. So I
Close enough.
Close enough. So I was born here, raised here, went to high school, and then went to college on the East Coast, and had a very sort of roundabout way of getting to where I am now. So I went to medical school and finished residency as an eye surgeon. And as I was,
were your parents also in that field, or
no, just me. But my parents were running a growing commercial real estate portfolio, so they started building their portfolio when I was like in middle school. And so the story there is my father was an attorney, and the Resolution Trust, what's the C stand for? RTC, Resolution Corporation. So after the savings and loans decline in the 80s, the government owned a bunch of mortgages and then packaged them. So no longer, previous to synthetic packages, they had actual packages that they auctioned off. And a lot of people who are currently in real estate today got their start there because these mortgages were auctioned for pennies on the dollar.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, so you could buy a package of mortgages, but it would be any type of asset class. So at one point,
this was like a real package of mortgage.
Yeah,
like
a real
just like
physical
a bond or something.
Yeah, no, real physical package, and you had to have cash
Uh-huh.
on the day
Uh-huh.
that you got to if you won the bid, you had to have cash at the bank on that day. Yeah.
Like a briefcase of cash.
Yeah.
So your dad at the time, who was an attorney, had he already been in real estate before? Or was he like, oh, this is a fire sale?
Yeah, it was basically he could recognize a good deal when he saw one.
Wow.
He was a litigator in Portland.
Okay.
Just partnered with a friend of his. And so my dad's friend took all the performing mortgages, and my dad took all the non-performing mortgages and foreclosed on those, and then then held on to the assets, and then went from there. So I was at home while my parents were like growing this company, and
he's bringing work home. They're talking about it,
talking
strategy.
Yeah, I feel like I knew about lines of credit and 1031 exchanges before I got my driver's license.
So interesting.
So yeah,
it's typical, like not the home dinner table conversation.
No, and I never really had the home dinner table conversation. My parents were pretty driven, and I was brought up in that kind of environment as well. So so they were building the portfolio and tried all sorts of different asset classes. We at one point had a sound studio in Burbank where they did Foley arts, and we had a retirement home not too far in Gresham, multifamily public storage, strip centers, basically anything that a bank had a business loan on, we got as part of the package. And for the most part, we would just sell them after once the process of foreclosure had gone through and we became full owners, and we would just sell it. But if there was an asset that was doing really well and cash flowing well, then they would hold on to it for a period of time, which is how they got sort of more focused in multifamily. And so their first asset in multifamily was in a small town in Texas called Beeville, which at the time did not have a single traffic light. So they bought something like 30 units in Beeville, Texas, as part of this RTC auction. And they recognized through ownership that multifamily was the best cash generator of the asset classes that
so
they
looked,
were.
After foreclosing on a variety of different things, they're like, okay, there seems to be a trend here. This one's doing the best.
Yeah, they found that they had the best outcomes in terms of a cash flow outcome metric.
I mean, do you want to explain why? Because maybe they were like managing the property and raising the rents, and then the properties were being appraised on that income approach? Or
I think right. Well, I think a lot of them were not well managed at the time of purchase, right? Because they were obviously in foreclosure. So there was a lot of upside. But I think multifamily has, as I'm sure many of your listeners are aware of, has a lot of benefits in that the leases are relatively short compared to longer commercial leases. You have an easier rate. You don't have to pay as much for the leases as compared to office or retail in terms of a commission structure or TIs. So you don't have a lot of upfront cash that needs to be lost. And yeah, eventually over time, we did end up taking the property management in-house. That didn't happen right away, but over the years they discovered that there was a huge benefit to having owner-operator model, and so that's what we do now. So we have an owner and a property management arm as well. Okay. So it grew very organically, and my mom tells a story about they kept investing in Texas. It was a very business-friendly environment for them, and so she tells a story about how she was driving down the highway and a huge gust of wind pushed her rental car into a ditch, and like these 3 cowboys in cowboy hats came and lifted her car out of a ditch. Wow. But they traveled to Texas a lot when I was growing up. So
they weren't doing it remotely. They were
going. I mean, they weren't managing it themselves, but they were going a lot.
Interesting.
And they started investing in a variety of other locations as well. And then when I finished my residency, as I was finishing residency, my dad became ill, and I'm an only child, and so I was sort of forced to decide what I was going to do about either taking over the portfolio or continuing medicine, and I decided to do both for a little while. So I took over in 2011, and at that time I was pretty lucky. I was very lucky, but we had an in-house attorney that worked for us full-time, and an analyst who had been working for us for like 3 years. And then we had a pretty well-seasoned property management company at that point.
Oh, wow. So you guys were a pretty big company.
They were pretty established, yeah. So when I stepped in, our current president of property management had been working for our company for already like 15 years. So we were really lucky that we had longevity there. But I ended up taking over and then working in a low-income clinic as an ophthalmologist for a period of time. And then eventually it was too much, so I stepped back. So, yeah, I think I'm one of the few eye surgeons in the world of multifamily. And one guy got too drunk and fainted at some multifamily conference, and I had to
which is
go and
fairly common, or
I mean, I don't. It hasn't happened more than once, but everyone was like, Ashley, and I was like, yeah, okay.
I'll check his eyes.
Yeah, I'll check his pulse and call the paramedics, and I think he just fainted. Yeah, it was anyway. So I'm one of the few physicians in the field that sort of a scale that I'm operating at. But yeah, we have. So when I took over, I just sort of carried out the rest of my dad's initial vision, and we talked about it for a little bit before he passed. And he had positioned us very well. So in 2011, we had a fair amount of capital, and actually ended up closing on 1,000 units. We were sitting right at 2,500 units when I took over, and added another 1,000 units in the first year and a half, 2 years.
Wow,
yeah. So it happened pretty fast. And at that time, we were invested in Texas, Arizona, Georgia, Florida, and Mississippi. And then I divested out of Mississippi and really focused on Texas. And then we added Huntsville, Alabama in 17 and 18. So now we're just located in Texas and in Alabama. Those are where our assets are.
And so talk to us about markets. What attracts you to specific markets? I've heard of Huntsville. I actually had a flight scheduled out of there to go look at a new construction there, and then COVID came and I canceled it. And my buddy that went anyway, he's done very well in Huntsville. What are your metrics, or how are you deciding on markets?
Yeah. So, Portland born and raised, and our offices are here. So we have a sort of a little bit of a disjointed remote workforce. So the corporate office here in Portland has marketing and accounting, but we have a tendency to really focus on the Southeast. That's always been the Sun Belt. Southeast has always been our driver. And primarily it's a demographics thing. It's very landlord friendly.
So all the states that you're in are kind of from a legality perspective, it's more landlord friendly.
Yeah, that's right. And so it's, especially when we're operating in that C space, we've sort of upgraded the portfolio to some degree, but when you do have a higher rate of delinquency, it's a lot easier to run your company if you're able to, process an eviction in a relatively rapid manner.
Do you want to talk a little bit about what that means, C space, for our listeners who aren't super familiar with grading in multifamily?
Sure. So like everything else in multifamily, you have to take it with a grain of salt because everything becomes a marketing term. So just be careful. But typically they will grade any asset, so multifamily, retail, office, as a B, or C, and everybody uses that
and this
phrase.
Is like for investors to look at, right?
So brokers and investors,
okay.
And everybody will use those A, B, and C letters a little bit differently. There's always a little bit of grade inflation or deflation, depending.
It's more qualitative than
quantitative. I painted the walls, now it's a B.
Yeah, exactly. Or you talk to a broker in New York and they're like, well, this is like a, B, and it's like a 45-story fancy high-rise. And then you go to somebody in, I don't know, Duluth, and they'll say, oh, this is definitely an A, and it's like a, barely 2-level sort of deal. So typically the newer, the nicer it is. The A space, the more, wear and tear, the more sort of workforce housing, then you have a C space. But just remember that it's sort of market driven. So you can only go as high as what's in your own market.
Right.
And in addition to that, there's just been gigantic amounts of population growth, employment growth, both in Texas, and then I actually just had a family member move to Huntsville, and she was like, "You should come check it out." And that's like 2016, and I just got a really good feeling. There's a Redstone Arsenal, which is a rocket base, which is where they do like space camp.
Yeah.
So there's an outdated metric that it has one of the highest PhDs per capita south of the Mason-Dixon. So Toyota has a campus there. It's got a relatively diverse population that you wouldn't necessarily expect. And especially for multifamily, what I really liked about it was that it had a somewhat transient, high-quality, high-income population. So a lot of people were on 3 or 4 year government contracts. So while they could afford a home, because it's not, you guys would be, it's uncomfortable to think about how cheap homes are in Huntsville. You can get a really nice house for like $250,000, but people didn't necessarily want to invest in buying a home and doing that process because they weren't going to be there for that long.
Yeah.
And a lot of people I met, I think this is changing now, but a lot of people I met would be whoever had the contract, either the mom or the dad, was going to Huntsville Monday through Thursday and then flying home because the family didn't want to relocate for a short period of time, which is exactly what you want in a multifamily.
Yeah, they're not there all the time.
They're not there all the time. They don't have like messy kids and pets and things.
Right. They're not moving in and out a ton of furniture.
Yeah, exactly. It was that's been a pretty lucky investment for us as well. But when I first started, I did a lot of things differently from my dad and my family, and they used to sort of laugh at me because one of the things I wanted to add on my underwriting spreadsheet was how many miles to the closest Starbucks, and they all said like this was 2011. Everyone was like looking at how far are you from like a municipal center, how far are you from like a post office or something, and I was like, I don't care, like Starbucks is way smarter than me. I'm not.
Who goes to the post office? First of
all, I was gonna say I have a friend who only buys properties near Whole Foods.
Yeah, and that was actually one of my other metrics. Was I said I want to know what brand is the closest grocery store. So, and these were things that were definitely not on our underwriting radar when I first started, because I was like, look, if it's a brand that I've never heard of and that's the closest grocery store, like we're going to be in a little bit of trouble.
Like a grocery outlet or something.
Yeah, or Fiesta Mart where I am, but. So those were the things that, those were a couple of touches that I
mean, now that's like common practice, right? I mean, that's like a saying. You build or buy where a Starbucks is, but that's interesting. Yeah, back in 2011, it wasn't a thing.
Well, I mean, because Starbucks has done the research for their location, so you're basically banking off that they've made a smart decision where they're putting their stuff.
That's right. I think there's been a lot more female investors over the last 10 years as well. I think when I started, it sounded like sort of a silly girl thing to do, and I was fine if they wanted to label it that. It worked out great. But a handful of times. If I had, I had a really good system when I first started. I had an asset manager and our in-house attorney, and we all had sort of an equal buy-in in terms of like who voted for which property. We all sort of came together, and so I would go visit a lot of these assets that were not close to Starbucks, and it was really nice to see that. Almost every single time I had my suspicions confirmed that was not either a metro or an asset that I wanted to invest in. So, yeah.
I mean, I would say like when Starbucks pops up, I mean, that means gentrification is not far behind if it hasn't started already. So,
yeah, that's right. And when was the last time you lived somewhere that was more than 3 miles from a Starbucks?
Yeah.
It's been a while, yeah.
I think I got 2 like within like 3 blocks.
Exactly. Those were a couple of things that I started looking at in terms of like flavors that I added to my sort of take on investing. We did also have a couple other non-multifamily assets. I had 2 office buildings, a strip center, and some raw land scattered around the country. And that was also a really good learning process for me, that I learned that it's a lot harder. And now, office is in a really dark place. But
with COVID and everything,
yeah, even prior to that, there's a lot of headwind in terms of owning office, because I just realized that it's a very relationship-driven business in terms of getting the leases and getting the lease renewal. So, in multifamily, you can pretty much get a renewal with your residents based on just doing good business.
Right.
But you have to pay out this big commission and these big TIs. And so while I think commercial, particularly office, is probably going to come back out of this downturn, it does mean, though, that you're really dependent on those local broker relationships to be successful. So, I would encourage anybody who is interested in office to get some scale in a metro instead of just buying a one-off investment, where you can do that pretty successfully with multifamily. You can, all you have to do is put an ad on whatever you want, like Zillow or Apartments.com or whatever ILS that you're looking for, and you can rent out your apartment. But you really have to have these on-the-ground relationships with brokers. Yeah. And so if you can get 3 or 4 or 5 small office buildings in an area, then you'll have a lot more pull, and you'll generate a lot more relationship with a broker. But it took time to understand that.
Yeah, so if someone's thinking about doing like a one-off thing, you wouldn't recommend an office building just because of how it helps to have that broker relationship and the time that it takes to get that. Then you may as well have a few of them so you can kind of...
Yeah, you have to think about it from the broker's perspective. Like, if you have like a meaty client who wants to sign for 2,500 square feet of office, are you going to call the guy that has 4 other buildings,
right?
Or you're gonna
multiple options,
choose, and in an office too, and like in multifamily, often the leasing broker and the sales broker are the same person, and so if they feel like they're gonna have a longer transactional relationship with you, then they're more likely to send that person your way.
Yeah, and I was going to say too, if you have like a residential rental and you're just scaling up to commercial, the process doesn't really change much. You're just taking on more scale.
That's right. Yeah. So you can do that in a more disparate, more remote kind of environment. You can buy one-offs here and there. It always helps to have relationships, but you can definitely do that.
Well, you've dashed my dreams of commercial office space at this point, because I never thought of it that way. I thought like I'll get a commercial office space and go get it, go out and go find my own, tenants or whatever. I've never really thought about it that hard, because I've heard a lot of people who are in the commercial office space and retail space that swear by triple net, and they love it. And obviously they love the 5-year contracts and everything built in, and not having to worry about it for a while. So
yeah, triple net is great. So I think office with triple net is a really lovely environment.
By the way, what's triple net again, just for our listeners?
So triple net is I'm trying to remember what the
I'm not in the office space anymore.
3 N's are going to be your rent, insurance, and taxes. So essentially, it's a contract with the things that are like hot on the market right now are Dutch Brothers or CVS or Taco Bell, where you have a brand name who doesn't want to own the dirt that it's on, and so they pay for all the expenses, and you just own the land that the business sits in. So they own the land in the building. So it is a great situation.
They own the building. And
you own the building.
You're leasing them the land, basically.
There are some land leases. You own the whole structure.
Okay. It's like condo, kind of like they own the inside.
Yeah, and but they pay for everything. So you don't have to worry about any expenses. You don't have to worry about any costs at all. They pay for all your costs, and then you just get a coupon. So I think triple net is great, especially if you don't want to constantly be, managing what the renewal rates are going to be and what you're how much you're paying your maintenance guy, and it does take a lot of the pain and suffering out. I'm a little bit of a control freak, and so it's not as appealing for me because I can't do anything to change. It's usually a 5 or 10 year lease, and so with a elevator baked into the contract, and then that's it. At the end of 5 years, you renegotiate.
And you never know how the market's going to act over the next 5 years? Because I mean, in the residential space, I've seen my rents jump pretty significantly. I've adjusted accordingly, and when you have that locked in for 5 years, you could be well under market in 5 years.
Right. And you also expose yourself. You get sort of in a relationship with whatever tenant you have. So, Dutch Brothers right now is one that I looked at a couple of years ago, and they're expanding really rapidly. They got bought by private equity and then went public, and so they're expanding really widely across the U.S. But if they overexpand, you're stuck with like a drive-through coffee shop, in the middle of a parking lot. That like you have to try to find somebody else.
Not
to
the
fill.
easiest thing to collateralize.
So unless you want to start making your own coffee, you have to find a tenant. And typically tenants, as you might imagine, if you close your eyes and imagine a Dutch Brothers or a Starbucks drive-through, they look very specific, and it's hard to sort of remodel that into something that somebody else wants.
And I'll say this too about like that commercial space, the office space, like, that was supposed to be like the safe tenant, but now all these businesses are shutting down. So that's the scary part about being in that space now, like Bed Bath & Beyond, like what's going on? They can't even afford to pay their rents now. So all those owners are SOL.
Yeah, there's a lot. I know there's a lot of, I'm so lucky. I sold an office building in Florida at the end of 2020, and I happened to have a buyer, and a couple of my partners, right as we were about to close the sale, were like, I don't know if we should go through with this. Like, I don't know if the offer's high enough. And I was like, if you want to buy it from me, that's fine, but I am getting out. Like,
you can
this
buy
is
me
like
out.
a building on fire. Like, I'm leaving. So I feel very lucky, but I think office has not hit rock bottom yet, but I think it will bounce back. But it's gonna be a long horizon.
Can I ask, and if you're open to sharing, like
Sure.
what types of tenants you had for those office spaces?
Oh, that was it was sort of like it was a one level mixed use office industrial with it had a loading bay. So that's typically one of the big designators, whether or not you have a loading bay in your space. And so it was a single story. We had a hodgepodge. We had the American Red Cross was in there. We had a fabricator of like a fiber optics telecom place where they had like a lot of service trucks that would sort of come in and out. And we had a call center, actually, this was one of the first businesses to go under, was a student loan debt collection call center. So when, the moratorium on student debt collection started, that business went under. They stole all of our toilet paper on the way out.
Oh, for the whole building?
Right at that time when toilet paper was
so you were
first they were collecting student debts?
And then it was toilet paper.
So you were dealing with more like local small business, not any of these big box chains at that time, other than the Red Cross, which I don't know if that really counts.
Yeah, I think it was just like a local chapter of the Red Cross,
So office space wise, are you now completely out of that, or do you still have some of it? And I'm kind of curious if you think that there's any space, like subspace in the office space that is, gonna be successful and viable during recessionary time, like that'll trend opposite of the rest of the office space, I guess.
Sure. So I have one building, and it's a little bit, the only reason why we bought it was because I was sort of tired of paying rent for our office. So we haven't moved in yet because there was a long lease on their space, and we had 4 years left on our space. So we're waiting for the current tenant's lease to end, and then our lease to end, and then we'll move into that space, and that way we'll just be owner occupied. And that is in Lake Oswego, and it's right next to the relatively new Mercado development there with all the Chef's Table restaurants and things. So it's walkable to all that. I think in the short term, I think suburban office is going to continue to do quite well.
Specifically, like suburban office that has kind of mixed stuff in there, one level.
I think all suburban office is going to be okay. I think people are going to downsize as their leases come due, right? So you have to think about most office leases are 5 or 10 years, and now we're coming up to 3 years after the pandemic. So people are going to be downsizing their leases in the next 3 to 6 years if they haven't already worked their way out of it, right? Defaulted or whatever. So I think office is going to see a shrinking, but I think there's going to be new leases to be had and new tenants to be had who are looking for different spaces. I think suburban across the country is going to continue to do well until I think downtown spaces are going to sort of glide to the bottom and then start climbing back up again.
I mean, that's because of the people working from home, working remote.
I think, working from home as a hybrid is going to become the new norm. So I think more people are going to start to return to the office. Houston, Dallas have had the highest rates of return to office, and it's still only like 70 to 75% of working hours that have returned to the office space. So I think a hybrid is sort of here to stay. But I think it's going to be a longer time till the downtown spaces where you have, expensive parking and you have, unfortunately, a lot of our metros are facing some pretty high crime rates right now before people want to make the commute back out. The suburban spaces where closer to people's homes, I think, will continue to do well.
Interesting. Yeah, I always think about like fast food or whatever doing well during recession, but I never had thought too much about like office space until pandemic time. So
yeah, it's an interesting market. I think if you're smarter than me, you'll be able to take advantages of the downturn in that space right now, but I'm not smart enough to figure out how to make it work out yet.
You got to read a crystal ball and figure out.
Yeah.
I mean, like the prices are good. I mean, obviously the prices have dropped, but it's like, are people going to actually rent the space now that it's cheaper?
Yeah, and especially getting financing on this office buildings, I think is going to be really hard. So,
and, I mean, for example, like my Keller Williams office, we actually just gave up half of our office because half the agents stopped coming in.
Right.
After the pandemic started. And they
or
got
come
used to
in
once a
week.
Once or twice a week now.
Yeah.
It used to be a full office, and now it's still pretty empty with half the office.
Which is kind
away.
of interesting too, because like real estate has always been remote. Was there? Did you ever need to go into the office? Like I always thought that was funny how much that changed.
I think it's just a pattern that people were used to, and once people got used to remote work, then they were just like, wow, I can just do this in my pajamas. I've been remote for like 5 years, even before the pandemic, so I never wanted to go back, and now the whole world basically knows what it's like, and if they can do most of their job at home, then might as well do that.
Yeah,
so.
Absolutely.
I did want to take a step back. Just obviously you're to residency and you having to take over this space, and yes, you've heard about real estate and 1031 exchanges and property management as a child with your family, but how did it feel about taking over this, like switching gears and taking over this business?
It was pretty terrifying. I mean,
had you done any real estate before that?
No, not a lick.
Wow.
So I was a art history major in college, and then went to medical school, and I took one econ class because my dad made me, and so I really didn't know what I was getting myself into. And at first I was actually very, very concerned about the learning and understanding how the finances of a deal would work out, and I'm sure a lot of your listeners, things are different now. There's so many podcasts and like blogs and things out there. But at the time, it was harder to find content.
There's not a book to read. Yeah,
there's not a book to read.
You can't just study.
And I was coming from the world where like that's all you did was read books and find answers and read more books and find more answers. And so there was no multiple choice test that I could figure out how to take. And so it was really, that part was tricky because it was a lot about feel, what feels right. And because there's no, well, at least for me, there wasn't one metric that you could really hang your hat on, right? You couldn't say, I 100% am going to buy this deal if it hits this cap rate, or I'm 100% going to buy this deal if it hits this, cash flow number. So, because it's all speculation. I mean, that was the other thing that I was really coming to terms with, was that pro formas are speculation by nature, and so it's only all your numbers are based on how good your best guess is, and so it took a lot of time for me to feel comfortable at that level of uncertainty, but I was also so lucky because we were coming out of the recession. Even in 2011, people were still a lot of people had been sort of washed away with the great financial crisis. And so I was one of the few people that had cash on hand. And at that time, a lot of the stuff that had been in distress was starting to bubble to the surface and come to market. So, I look back now, I didn't buy anything for less than a 10 cap, which I'm so ridiculous to say out loud now. But I mean, I think the first 3 deals I did were 10 caps. I was able to buy in like downtown Dallas. Like it's like it's sort of.
And that was before doing any like remodeling too.
Yeah,
right?
That's
These were
right.
10 caps.
That's
but
right.
You also they were value add 10 caps, right?
That's right. Yeah. So
Amazing.
yeah, I mean, it was a different time. I'm a runner, and so I always say that it was sort of like running straight downhill. Like it was. Even if you messed up, you were still doing pretty well, which I was very lucky about. So you were able to make a lot of mistakes and still sort of do okay, which helped out. Yeah, and then what I've learned over time is that the numbers are actually relatively easy to digest, and we actually have about 80 employees, and that actually takes up the vast majority of my time and brain space and energy now. As people are not as predictable as even your best guess pro forma numbers, and so it becomes that becomes something to work on, more hands rolled up, more sleeves rolled up, I should say.
Oh, well, I'm also curious too, because you mentioned like you came in and you're like, we should look at this metric, we should look at the Starbucks metric. How do you feel your training in medicine also carried over as well, in the sense that coming into it with different eyes, different training?
Different eyes, literally. I think there's, first of all, any physician has to have some amount of data analytics skill set. And I think that data analytics and pattern recognition go really far when it comes to analyzing an asset. So I think, a lot of stuff was coming on the market then, so much more than now, and we were able to just underwrite. And when you just have 6 different assets that are roughly the same asset, roughly the same unit count or roughly the same cap rate, and you can just do side by side comparisons, that's really where
you kind of look at it the same as double-blind studies, and the p-value is just lining them
exactly.
up.
Exactly. It's just numbers in and numbers out, and looking at the data, and so try to be as non-emotional about it as possible. But that, I think, is probably where I drew the most strength from. But also, I think there's something special about, for all your listeners, there's something special about the novice, right? I forget who said it, but there's the problem of the expert, right? Where if you know too much, you're going to be too limited. So most people that are entrepreneurs or starting a new startup are not actually experts in their field, because if they knew all they were supposed to know, they wouldn't start a company because it would be too hard. Like for one thing, adding the Starbucks thing, that was a big deal. But also one of the things I always do, just because of my personal choices, is I always like to eat as healthfully as I can when I travel, and so I typically end up going to a grocery store and buying fruit and maybe some yogurt. And what I've discovered is that if I go to the grocery store in the middle of the day, closest to the asset that I'm looking at, I learn a lot about the submarket. I learn a lot about the people that are there. I even learn a lot about the submarket based on the grocery store itself, like how big is the produce section, or how big is like the processed food section. So there's some basics. Also, I'm a runner, so if there's ever an asset that I can go for a run after a tour, because there's enough green space, there's enough sidewalks, or it's safe enough, that's also, and I can just take sort of a slower pace approach to looking at a submarket that I don't know very well. That can also be really informative. So just these little things where nobody would put that in a book. At least I hope not. But like if you can, not discount your own personal experience and whatever you can bring to the table, that can be helpful.
No, I was gonna mention. I think what you're describing, like in the terms of the news, they call it a food desert.
Yeah.
I don't know if you heard about that. That's basically
Yeah.
what you described. It's basically an area where like these businesses don't want to put their big box chains there because their clientele is not going to be the ones buying all the produce, all the things, so they don't even provide that.
Right.
And it's very unhealthy for the community. They typically have food deserts where it's a lower income neighborhood, et cetera. So.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. If the closest store that you have is like to your point, like a Family Dollar, that's always a red flag. But even still, like you can learn a lot, but just like going into the closest Target and seeing how tidy the shelves are, like it just can tell you more about what's happening in the submarket than all the best like CoStar reports.
Yeah,
because you can see it with your own eyes, like what's happening in the space.
Yeah, and like I said, real estate's not all numbers. It's a lot of the intangibles about a feel of a neighborhood. How safe do you feel? Do you have things that you want nearby? And I mean, if you were just going off numbers, a lot of people say Texas is not the best place to invest because of high property taxes. I have friends who've legitimately rejected deals because they didn't like that, that aspect of it. Some people love Florida. Some people love, I think you mentioned Pennsylvania.
Yeah, I mean, I think right now Texas and Florida should not be on anybody's list because the insurance rates are really onerous, especially the closer you get to the coasts. We've had probably a full 100% increase in our insurance in the last 3 years. So from like 3 years to now, it's gone up.
But you're able to keep your property. I've heard even some people like are having hard times keeping their property insured in general because their carriers will just keep dropping and then they'll get force-placed insurance, which is just like crazy expensive.
Yeah, I mean, we have force-placed insurance on one of our properties. I basically pushed the limit that our lenders would allow in terms of our deductibles, which really burned during the freeze, the big freeze in Texas 2 years ago, because I sort of was under my reasoning for pushing the premiums was like, well, I have 12 properties. So what's the likelihood that 12 properties are all going to be affected at the same time, even if I have one hurricane or one terrible tornado or one terrible storm?
Or the whole electric grid goes down in the state.
But I had not anticipated
Every pipe in
that
the state
the
freezes.
entire state would freeze. And it basically, I hit my deductible at 8 of my 12 properties.
Oh my God.
So it was pretty uncomfortable. But no, I think. Right now in the current, plus Texas has really become a darling for a lot of investors, and so it has pushed cap rates to a point where I haven't been able to transact in Texas for a few years now.
Interesting.
I mean, I would say, you were there because your family started investing there first, so you have that experience of that market, so that makes a huge difference, right?
I think it does, but I also think that you have, yes, that it helped that we already had a pro feeling about it, but we were also in Mississippi and Nevada and Arizona, but Texas definitely was the shining star in the portfolio at that time. So.
Was it? Did you say you pulled out of Mississippi?
Yeah,
You
that's
divested there. What was the impetus of that? Was it just because of that specific asset wasn't performing, or
there was actually if you can believe it, I had 5 assets in Mississippi.
Okay.
So something close to 900 units there at one point.
Wow.
Yeah, it was. It was a bit of an intangible thing. I just didn't feel, I would visit it and it felt less and less vibrant with each visit. So yeah, it's not anything. It's embarrassing to say I didn't have it
wasn't a very specific
number
reason.
that triggered anything.
I mean, was it causing problems? Were there lots of delinquencies?
There was a handful of assets. It took a little while for the recession to really damage the casino industry. So there was a large riverboat community out south of Memphis, and the riverboat casinos. They stopped a lot of flights, and people were gambling less, and it got to the point where there was a full casino. I think it was a Harrah's, a full 30-story casino hotel that ended up trading for $2 million.
Wow.
And unemployment rates just went really high, and we stuck through it until the whole market stabilized and unemployment rates came back down. And once I felt like it was not going to be a fire sale, I was like, well, I've ridden this ride. It's now for somebody else to take over.
I mean, I'm curious too. Like, is it good to have your tenant base being a gambling community?
Well, it's interesting. We have previously owned in Las Vegas, and I've gone back and looked at assets there as well. It's a funny market. Like, you have to take cash a lot of times.
Here's some chips.
Yeah. You have shift workers. I remember asking a broker why there wasn't enough parking, and they're like, oh, nobody's really here at the same time because people work shifts, and so you don't have to overburden the parking lot. It's definitely a different space. You have a much higher delinquency rate. You have a much higher rate of skips or people that just disappear. But unlike the riverboats, I don't think Vegas is ever, even in the worst recessionary environment, people are still going to gamble. So I don't think it's a bad investment.
Okay, that's good to know.
And just as a female minority in sort of the top of your one of the top positions in your field, what is it like going to these conferences? And I mean, I'm sure now it's a little bit different than it was 10, 13 years ago, but how have you kind of like built yourself in that crowd? And
yeah, that's a great question. I mean, it was pretty scary I shouldn't say scary, that's not true. I went to medical school at LA County Hospital, and I was surrounded by like gangbangers, and so it wasn't scary, but it was definitely intimidating to show up. I still to this day, I would say the investment brokerage market, in the spaces where I work is like 95% white male. The owners are about 95% white male, and I'm typically, the only person there who's not somebody's date. And at first it was a little bewildering, but I grew up playing sports, and my dad was a big figure in my life, and I've never really been terribly uncomfortable in a room of guys. So I sort of got my feet under me, and I kept my mouth shut and sort of listened to everybody talk, which was, I think, really key when I first started. Then what I think I have the luxury of being a woman is that people show their cards a little bit. People show their hand a little bit sooner than they would if you were
interesting.
So
they're not like as intimidated. Or,
yeah,
they feel
or
like
if they're willing to work with you and more open
Yeah.
and more trustworthy and more willing to like not put you in a box, then I think typically, and this isn't always 100% true, they're probably going to be a better business partner for you moving forward. And so I was very fortunate to form a handful of relationships with investment sales brokers and mortgage brokers who were interested and willing to sort of work with me to get deals done. Whereas I don't know if I would have had that same selection process as easily without having those like biases. So I am lucky enough where I don't really attend a lot of the conferences anymore because I've established a lot of relationships with people, and I know the brokers that have been more favorable to work with and the brokers that have been a little bit squirrely. So, and I find that that's really a key component to how I do business these days.
Cool. And if you were to recommend to somebody that was thinking about getting into real estate, whether it's the commercial side in a capacity like you're in, or just like investing for their first time, what would you say to them? Like, where's a good place to start?
Well, I always tell people that the most boring stuff is the most important place to start, which is the tax information. So, the biggest benefit of being a real estate owner really lies in how you apply that to your taxes. And so, understanding the taxes either in the metro that you're looking in or nationwide, I think that that's really important. But also, like, when you're thinking about investing, and if you wanted to invest with partners, for example, making sure that you're recognized that, like, if you do, for example, a 1031 exchange and you have a partner, they're going to be your partner for a really long time until you're ready to pay those capital gains. Or you can form a TIC, which is another way to sort of like make it a relationship without sort of getting married.
What's
tenants
that?
in common.
Yeah, tenants in
common.
common. Yeah,
Yes.
okay.
Sorry. So you can either form a TIC, and then you can sort of separate the TIC and do your own 1031 exchanges at the time of sale, or you can form an LLC and do, own with somebody. But if your hope and dream is to never pay those capital gains tax, then you're just going to be doing 1031 exchange after 1031 exchange with that partner. So you better want to hang out with them for like the next 10 or 15 years, because otherwise one of you is going to have to pay the piper, or both, right? So I would say that is something to keep in mind. It seems really straightforward to get together with somebody and just, invest in a property together, so that you can sort of take it to the next level, but you end up extending the relationship longer than you may originally think, or not reaping the benefits of it.
Interesting.
No, I think you're the first person to talk about taxes right as the first thing to think about if you're trying to get started in real estate, which is really important. I mean, that's probably some of your biggest savings personally, too.
Yeah, I mean, as frustrating sometimes as it is, the two people that probably have the biggest return on investment that I pay are going to be my accountant and my estate attorney. So that's the other person that you should, make sure that you understand when you're going into this, depending on the stage of life you're in and the family members that you have, like, who's going to be the successor do you have? Because presumably one of the benefits of having real estate is that you can own it for a long period of time and appreciate that appreciation. But it's really helpful to have sort of not necessarily a succession plan, but like an idea of how you can benefit from the taxes.
Oh, yeah. I mean, there's so many, like you were mentioning, like looking at the state taxes and then looking at your capital gains taxes and then all the write-offs you can do. And I forgot what it's called. I mean, there's so many aspects in terms of taxes that save you money in terms of real estate.
Yeah, there's depreciation. You can go on
yeah.
and on and on. I mean, I really liked doing the interior decorating of the leasing offices. So, like, I'll do my own. I don't hire a decorator. I, like, go to Wayfair and pick out some couches, and that's fun. But really what I need to be spending my time is understanding the tax code.
Well, that's what I feel like you got to spend the time on the things that you like and then hire the people to do the things that you don't like, right?
Exactly, right.
Yeah,
exactly.
That's why I have a good CPA, too. I'm just like, and I spend maybe, like, 12 hours with them a year.
Yeah, but it can be very beneficial. Having an accountant, I would say, and then understanding the ins and outs.
And if there's any physicians listening that are kind of interested in investing, how do you feel that you've kind of made that transition? I mean, I know you were doing both at the same time. Where's the point where you felt like, okay, this is what I'm going to do? I mean, you were kind of forced into it a little bit.
Yeah. Well, I think there's a lot of people that as long as your physician life isn't so all-encompassing. So say you're working like a 0.75 FTE or you don't have as much call, then I don't think you need to like abandon your practice in order to get started in real estate.
You can do both.
You can do both. But I think a lot of my friends are still physicians, still practicing, and they're seeing that maybe they can't foresee themselves keeping up this level of practice, well into their 60s. And so having a nest egg and having like a small burgeoning portfolio that's throwing off some cash is a really good way to say I can take what's, the beginning blocks of a portfolio that I can then devote more time to once I retire.
No, I love that. That's great.
Yeah.
Oh, and if people are looking to get a hold of you, find you on social media, how could they get a hold of you?
Sure. You can, let's see, you can email me. My email is Ashley Hayden at Hayden Properties. So that's I'm not going to spell it. Properties, plural, .com. Or you can go to our website, which is hayden-properties.com, and check us out there. Yeah.
Great. Well, hey, thanks so much for coming on the show. We really
Thank you.
appreciate your knowledge.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Take care.